Welcome back to American Nostalgia Garage. We're going to pick up on this Blazer where we left off. Does it look like it's in better condition? No, it doesn't. So, we got to do some brake work, as I mentioned in the previous video. We need to put a cooler on this transmission. We need a lockup conversion on this 700R4. We need a TV cable, a throttle bracket, a transmission temperature gauge, an oil dipstick, a brake caliper, 2 brake lines, and a partridge in a pear tree, just to round out the list. Anyway, I guess maybe I should get started. It seems like a long list. Now, I don't know if these brake lines were actually bad or not. You know, just by the amount of rust that they have there. I figured they were probably still pretty good. You can tell by all the rust that they're still good. And then these are all the pieces. So I figured it probably didn't need these brake lines by the look of them, because they look like they're in fantastic shape. But I ended up doing them anyway. So now we have a brand new line on the passenger side front and the driver's side front. If you're yelling at me because I didn't show you that, as I've said before, I want to try and keep this rated G. And there's only one way to do that, and that's not for you to watch me do frustrating jobs. Let's get this grill off. And behind this grill there is a heat exchanger that was installed when the previous owner put the diesel in there. They put in a air to water intercooler, and they have the heat exchanger behind the grill. So we're going to remove that and put a trans cooler back there. All right, here's our cooler. We got it off Amazon. Again, with the good decisions. Actually, I wish there was a cooler out right now because it's about 8,700 degrees. I'm sweating through my shirt, and the backs of my knees are sweating. Anyway, I'm going to stuff this thing in here somewhere. All right, there's our cooler. I've got both of our lines run this way and then underneath the rad support. And here is the golden White House. This is going to go in line of the cooler line that comes out of the transmission to the cooler on this side, and it'll get a temperature for us that we're going to put a gauge inside the cab. I have the cooler plumbed into the cool side, which is where the fluid comes out of the internal cooler in the rad. So I have the external cooler routed to the outlet of the internal cooler, and that's just because this will be cooling the transmission with coolant temperature, so it'll never go below, during running, especially with an LS, like 190 degrees or higher. Even on this side where it is cooler after it's gone through the rad, let's call it 140 degrees, I want that external cooler to get the last say on how cool the transmission fluid is. And if this can get it down to, like, say 140, by the time it goes through this internal cooler and goes through the external cooler, hopefully it'll get it down even lower than that. Then I have down here for a gauge, I plumbed it out of the hot side of the transmission so that we have the actual temperature that the transmission is seeing itself or creating. And it's just teed in right here with a sensor. And we'll go to a gauge on the inside. All right, we got our gauge installed down here, so it'll hit me in the knee while I'm driving. And then there's a mess, and why is there a volleyball in there? Not sure. So moving on, we already replaced our brake lines, and if you want to actually use the brake lines, you got to bleed them. Except that if you want to bleed the lines, you got to have a bleeder. And if you snap it off while you're trying to loosen it up, then you don't have one. So now I'm replacing a caliper. Okay, it's becoming apparent that we will be doing this with vice grips. Alright, luckily these things are easy. Got it slapped on. It was only like 32 bucks, and then it's got a core charge. But yeah, it's like 32 bucks. I got the bleeder open. You can see it just started having fluid come out. I'm going to let it gravity bleed for a little bit, and then we'll tighten it up, and hopefully we'll have some brakes. We got to take the transmission pan off of this thing. So we can put a new gasket, a new filter, and I got to put a new pressure switch for the 4th gear pressure port for a lockup.
Yeah.
Chunky, can you get me a screwdriver, please? Thank you, my chunk. Oh, I need another. Okay.
Good job, Daddy.
I think I got it. All right, let me show you what's going on and give you a brief explanation. So here's our valve body inside our transmission. This right here is our 4th gear pressure port switch. And this wire used to go there, I pulled it off. Over here, on the other end, is our 2-wire solenoid. You can see the 2 wires. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull this switch out. I'm going to put a 2-port switch, like a 2-prong switch. And then the idea is that this switch, whenever it sees pressure, is going to ground itself or switch on, and it will finish the ground for our solenoid over there. But you don't want the converter on all the time. This will only come on in 4th gear, but we only want it to come on when we're cruising, because you don't want the converter to come on when you're like on the throttle. It just won't work right. So we're also going to put a vacuum switch, which is also going to be in this ground circuit. So let me pull that out, put the new switch in, and I'll get back with you guys when I do the top side stuff. All right, before I waste $400 in fluid, I'm going to test our solenoid. So right now I have, you could just do this with jumper wires. I'm doing it with a power probe. I'm using the positive and negative side of the solenoid. I'm going to energize it, and I want to listen to see if it clicks. I don't know if you heard that or not, but it clicked. So solenoid's good. I have the switch on. I'm going to throw some terminals on it, get it wired up to our plug to going out to the exterior of the case, and then we're done here. All right, so here's the other part of our equation, a pressure switch. It's normally open. When a vacuum is applied to this port, it switches these 2 connectors together. Here is a expertly drawn diagram of what we're doing here. So here's our solenoid, here's our pressure switch, here's our vacuum switch, although I don't have it labeled. We're going to have 12 volts coming in. That's going to go to our solenoid. Then our solenoid's going to have a ground that comes out. It goes to our pressure switch inside the transmission. That pressure switch is going to come to our bulkhead fitting that's on the transmission case. It's going to come out and go to our vacuum switch. So when this pressure switch sees our 4th gear pressure port pressure, it's going to ground this switch, and the ground from the solenoid is going to go through this switch. It's going to go through the bulkhead, and it's going to go to the vacuum switch. So now this is grounded, and electricity is out all the way up to this point. Once this sees vacuum, this is going to switch over to ground, and it's going to ground the whole circuit. So we'll have our power at that point and our ground at that point, and that'll activate our solenoid. If there's no pressure at the 4th gear pressure port, then this won't switch and the converter won't lock up. If there is pressure, but let's say we're on the throttle and there's no vacuum, then this will stay unswitched, it'll stay off, and we still won't have ground. So even though we have the pressure, we won't have the ground. And vice versa. Even if we have vacuum, let's say at idle, our converter is not going to lock up because it won't see the 4th gear pressure. Basically, our approach is to make sure that it only locks up in 4th gear, and only when we're in vacuum situations where we are at cruise and we want that converter to lock up. I'll be selling this portrait probably, I'll throw it on eBay. I'm going to list it at $2 million just because of the nature of how good it is. You can email me if you want it. New day. Truth be told, it's several days later. In fact, I just got back from a family vacation at Disney World. So needless to say, I'm in no mood to climb underneath the Blazer and get full of rust, but that's what we're going to do. We need to put an exhaust on this thing. I really don't want to drive it sounding like a Huey helicopter. It's cool, but also a little extra information. Just had a birthday, and I'm getting old. So I don't really want it to sound as loud as it is. Got to put some exhaust on it, make it sound nice, you know, classy. As white trash as it gets, you know? Yeah, that's a ticket. Anyway, let me show you what we got here. I cut some exhaust out. I'm actually already sweating and I'm already dirty. Actually, new shirts. Got our logo on the work shirts. Gotta have the American flag. We got the back. Here's the driver's side. The header comes out sort of right into this cross member here. They kind of want you to go below it, but there's a lot of space above it. So I think I'm gonna take the exhaust, jog it over this way, and then send it back over this cross member here. And the same thing over here on the passenger side. Gonna jog it over towards the frame and then have it come backwards. Let's get cracking. All right, so here's the plan. These bends that most people hate are actually probably my favorite, and that's because you pretty much have any bend that you need right here. If I want a 45, I chop it there. If I want a 90, I chop it there. If you want some thing in between, you can get whatever you want out of this, and usually you can end up with two if you cut it right. Work with your resources. Anyway, I'm going to do like a 45, maybe a little bit more, and then I'm going to cut the same 45 out of this, so it kind of goes like this. Let me show you. So here's what we ended up with. It's got to be welded, of course. Basically, the idea here is cut the U-bend at certain angles, matching angles on each side of the U, at such an angle that it gives you the amount of offset that you need for the pipe. So essentially, you want to go straight with the pipe, but you need it to be moved over a couple inches. This is the way I like to do it. Could do this with 245s, but this doesn't waste two bends, and U-bends are pretty much useless unless you're going to do something like this with them. So this is what I'm doing. So it turns out this actually fits the passenger side too, although it's a little bit tight, so I'm actually going to make pretty much a replica of this, but with a little bit less angle, so a little bit less offset. So I'll make that, and then we'll get them slapped in there. All right, here's what we came up with. Each side is just going to get a pipe that goes around where the transfer case is and whatnot, comes back, ends in a muffler. We'll probably do a turn down or some sort of thing down here, or run it over the axle later. But for the sake of getting out and driving this thing, this is what we're going to do. Let me throw it in, and then I'll show you some other things we did inside. All right, we are this close to taking this thing for a ride. So let me show you what's going on. We got throttle cable, throttle bracket, throttle cables from Amazon. Do not buy your throttle cable from Amazon. Of course I did. TV cable is on and adjusted. We got fluids in it. I had to drain the oil and refill it just to make sure that the correct amount of engine oil was in it, and it is. So long story short, do not buy your dipsticks from Amazon, because they will not go all the way into the oil, and it'll tell you that you have no oil, so you'll overfill it. The radiator fans I have hooked up on this little thing here. I'll do something about a temperature switch at another time. I looped the alternator fielding wire so that we can get some charging going on, so this doesn't die and leave me stranded somewhere, which probably will anyway. Let's get going. Let's go. Check the brakes, make sure we can stop. We can. Door is wide open. Well, we should shut that. All right, well, we thrashed, but we are driving this thing. The last engine this thing had in it was a diesel tractor engine, whatever. Now it is 6-liter LS powered, and I couldn't be happier to be driving this thing. It's awesome. It sounds good. Stops okay. Needs brake work. But it's got a modern engine in a cool classic truck. I will say I hear some noise that, I don't know if it's the transmission in second gear, but I'm going to put some miles down on it, try to figure out what's going on with it, but I'm driving it. The transmission definitely sounds like it's hurt. But that's what happens when you buy a car from a guy who says that the last guy who owned it didn't get it running, and there's, you know, everybody had their turn breaking it, and now here you are trying to get it running. that don't sound happy at all. The engine sounds happy, but that transmission sounds like it is banging and clacking away. Well, we did it. We're back home. And we got another one of the trucks on the property running, driving. And I had a ball. This thing is awesome. This thing is going to be a cool truck. I love the way that it looks. I love the body style. I love everything about this truck. And it drove pretty good. It's got some aches and pains, but you don't want to know something? It hasn't been driven. This is the first time it's been driven in a long time. And now I got to figure out all the little aches and pains that it has and fix those. It sounds like the transmission might be hurt. You know, those are just the things that happen. The brakes pull a little bit, but those, you know, they get some heat in there and get everything moving around and might come around. So I'm super excited to have this thing finished and be able to drive it. If you guys enjoyed watching this build, please subscribe to the channel, drop a like. And this thing's not going away. Got some other stuff to do on it, some work to do on it, and I hope to see you guys come back to the channel and watch more videos. So anyway, thank you guys for watching, and as always, American Nostalgia Garage out.